vanished. The following day, August 31st, 2003, Katie's mother, Jean, received a phone call. This changed her life forever. Recounting that day, Jean described it as follows. She had been preparing for a Labor Day weekend cookout with her family and friends when the phone rang at 2:15 afternoon, bringing news that would shatter her world. The caller asked, "Have you talked to Katie today?" The phone call was from Katie's roommate, Veronica, who had been searching for her and had already contacted Katie's friends and local hospitals without finding any sign of her. Jean was informed by Veronica that Katie had left the party by herself the night before. Veronica and Joe had fallen asleep at the party location, assuming Katie had returned home. However, when they woke up in the morning, Katie was nowhere to be found. Her family immediately contacted the police to report her disappearance. Around the same time, a passerby discovered a half-naked woman's body near a desert landfill. Although there was no identification nearby, police officers arriving at the scene concluded that the body had likely been there for less than 24 hours. It was clear to them that the victim's death was no accident. The victim, estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old, had been stripped of clothing from the waist down. Examination of the body revealed self-defense wounds on her arms, indicating she had put up a fight and scratched her attacker. The police found skin particles under her fingernails, providing them with the perpetrator's DNA. Strangulation marks were visible on her neck, initially suggesting it as the cause of death. The investigators concluded that the young woman did not die at the remote desert landfill where her body was found, as there were no signs of a struggle near the scene. Instead, it appears her body was moved there in an attempt to delay the search. A disturbing detect on the victim's body revealed burn marks on her arms and back, suggesting that the perpetrator had tried to dispose of the body or destroy evidence by setting it on fire. The police quickly made a connection between Katie's disappearance and the discovery of a young woman's body. Katie's father was called to the morgue to identify the body. Katie's mother, Jean, said that the young woman's body was their daughter's. Jean struggled to put into words the immense pain and agony they were enduring. As if they were falling into a deep, dark abyss with no way out, leaving them with no sense of tomorrow or any remaining joy. Katie's father shared that when they lifted the sheet, revealing his daughter's bruised and disfigured face, he was deeply saddened. The residents of once peaceful Los Cruces were shaken by the horrific incident. The police were determined to find the perpetrator as soon as possible, aware that there was no guarantee the person wouldn't commit another crime. The investigation into Katie's case began with a thorough examination of her final hours. The police aimed to piece together her last moments, where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, and if she had any conflicts or enemies. Since the party was about a mile from Katie's home, investigating whether she made it back safely was a priority. To start, the investigators spoke with Veronica, Katie's roommate, and Joe. The detectives found it suspicious that these two stayed at the party while Katie left alone in the middle of the night. However, Joe was uncooperative, stating that Katie had departed, leaving her purse, phone, and keys behind. The investigation team then focused on retracing Katie's route home, going door to door to interview residents, hoping for any leads. Unfortunately, no one saw or heard anything that could help the investigation. Investigations revealed a crucial detect. Katie likely returned to her house but failed to enter it. Notably, she had left her keys behind. Upon searching the house, the investigator found Katie's shoes beside her bedroom window. It appears she attempted to enter through the window but was ambushed. Footprints in the gravel nearby supported this theory. A violent struggle ensued, but sadly, Katie's attacker overpowered her. Further investigation led the authorities to believe that the perpetrator disposed of Katie's body at a desert landfill, attempting to conceal evidence by setting it on fire. The central question remained, Was the attacker a stranger or someone Katie trusted? With around 40 party attendees, there was a strong possibility the killer was an acquaintance. Could the perpetrator have been Katie's boyfriend, Joe? This led investigators to interview partygoers, unearthing a critical detail Joe did not mention. Several witnesses reported that Katie saw Joe kissing another girl, which sparked a heated argument between the couple. In her state of anger, Katie hastily left the party alone, forgetting her purse. When questioned by police, Joe neglected to disclose this crucial information. He also did not inform Katie's parents about the incident, despite their curiosity about why Katie had left the party by herself. The investigators questioned Joe again about his whereabouts on the night of Katie's murder. They had discovered that he and Katie had a fight earlier that evening after she saw him kissing another girl. Joe acknowledged the argument and explained that he followed Katie home but did not enter her house. He claimed he saw her bedroom light was off and assumed she was asleep, so he returned to the party. However, the new information sparked suspicion because it indicated Joe was not at the party when the attack occurred, and none of the partygoers could confirm when he returned. During further interviews with party attendees, investigators found another peculiar detail. When he returned to the party, Joe called Katie. Then Joe heard the phone ring, and he realized that she had left her phone at the party. Despite this, Joe continued to phone her until morning. Was he trying to create an alibi or pretend to be concerned about Katie's well-being? Investigators asked Joe to clarify his actions, but he refused to cooperate with them any. Katie loved Joe very much, but he didn't even come to her funeral, which aroused even greater suspicion. Investigators decided to test his DNA. They had collected DNA evidence from Katie's body, mostly under her fingernails, where they found human skin cells. The sample's DNA all belonged to one person. The police needed to compare his DNA to the DNA found on Katie's body. But there were problems with that. Joe was out of town, and his lawyer informed the investigators that Joe refused to provide a DNA sample. The police suspected that Joe was involved in Katie's death, given his suspicious behavior. To confirm that, they needed to find a legitimate way to obtain Joe DNA. However, this took time, and in the meantime, they searched other possible explanations. They investigated similar cases to determine if Katie was the victim of a serial offender. The DNA found on her body was matched against a national database, but no matches were found. The investigators decided to revisit the party where Katie was last seen. They identified the male attendees and asked for their DNA samples, which they all willingly provided. However, none of their DNA matched the samples found on Katie's body, leading the investigators to focus on Joe again. Notably, Joe was the only person who had refused to provide a DNA sample, but the investigators found an alternative method to obtain Joe's DNA sample. Katie and Joe spent time in her bedroom before attending the party, engaging in intimate contact. The police visited Katie's house and collected the bed sheet, hoping to find Joe's DNA. Their efforts were successful, and the lab discovered a sample of male DNA on the sheet. However, the DNA did not match the sample found on Katie's body, indicating that Joe was not the suspect. This discovery raised further questions about Joe's behavior, as he had refused to cooperate with the police despite not being involved in the attack on his girlfriend. The police sent the test results to Joe's lawyer, informing them that he had been cleared as a suspect. Joe agreed to talk to the police again and provided a DNA sample. The results supported the initial findings. Joe was not involved in Katie's crime. When questioned about his initial reluctance to cooperate, Joe explained that he and Katie had been intimate before the party, and he was worried that his DNA would be found on her body. The mystery surrounding Joe's behavior on the night of Katie's death remained unsolved for the police and Katie's family. After Joe was cleared as a suspect, the police explored alternative theories. Party attendees informed investigators that Katie was wearing rings, including the one given by Joe, but none were found on her body when it was discovered. The police believed that the killer removed the rings from Katie's fingers. They searched local pawn shops but did not find Katie's rings. The discovery of specific tire tracks near where Katie's body was found provided another new lead. Experts identified the tire brand and model, and the manufacturer informed the police that these tires were most commonly used on pickup trucks. Unfortunately, this information did not help identify the culprit, and the case hit a dead end. A year after Katie's attack, a similar crime occurred in Wisconsin. A girl in Green Bay was assaulted, set on fire, and left for dead. However, the victim somehow managed to survive by pretending to be dead. Once her attackers left, she put out the flames and sought help at a nearby residence. The survivor described her attackers to the police as two Hispanic men. The police created sketches based on her description and released them to the public. A local farmer recognized the men in the sketches as his workers, Gregorio Morales and Juan. One of them had relatives in Los Cruces, and he often visited them. Both men were arrested. As a result, the police were able to apprehend both suspects. Initially, investigators thought they had identified Katie's attacker, but the DNA test results contradicted this conclusion. The sample's DNA did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. Although Gregorio Morales and Juan were later convicted of assaulting the girl in Green Bay, they were not linked to Katie's case. Gregorio Morales and Juan were sentenced to 50 and 70 years in prison, respectively. The only leads the police had to go on were the tire tracks from the crime scene and the DNA samples of the perpetrator. Katie's family was hopeful that these DNA samples would allow the police to identify the person who took their daughter's life. Unfortunately, there were complications with the DNA evidence. At that time, police were not mandated to collect DNA samples from individuals when they were arrested. Katie's mother was shocked and devastated by the loss of her daughter to a violent man. The family's main concern is to find out the identity of the perpetrator, understand the motive behind this terrible crime, and most importantly, that the killer is held accountable and no longer poses a threat to others. The lead detective gives an update on the case, saying that aside from DNA evidence, they currently lack concrete other leads to investigate further. Katie had fought hard for her life, which resulted in her killer's blood and skin being found under her fingernails. This had allowed investigators to create a DNA profile. Detectives uploaded the DNA into CODIS, the National Forensic Database, and then checked it against the offender database on a weekly basis to see if there was a match. Although they had the killer's identity through the DNA profile, the police needed to find the matching individual in their database to make an identification. Katie's family felt hopeful, they knowing the police would eventually match the DNA to a suspect, bringing them closer to justice for their daughter's tragic death. Katie's murder case saw a major breakthrough 3.5 years later. On December 18, 2006, the lab found a DNA sample that matched the DNA found on Katie's body. The perpetrator was identified as 26-year-old Gabriel Avila, a married man of two. He has a very long previous criminal record and had been released from prison shortly before Katie's death. On November 13, 2003, Gabriel Avila was apprehended by authorities after breaking into an apartment, armed with a knife. Fortunately, two young women inside the apartment managed to evade his attack by quickly locking themselves in the bathroom and dialing 911 for emergency assistance. He was convicted of aggravated burglary in March 2004, but released on bond. A flaw in the system caused a significant delay, and it wasn't until 3.5 years later that investigators were able to link him to Katie's death. Gabriel Avila managed to evade police for nearly a year. Then, he being apprehended in November 2004, based on a tip. He received a 9-year prison sentence. While in prison, Gabriel Avila provided a DNA sample, but it took 2 more years to be tested. Once the results showed a partial match with the DNA from Katie's crime scene, investigators quickly jumped into action. They found the truck Gabriel Avila used to dispose of Katie's body and discovered a ring belonging to her in the center console. In 2006, after finding a ring belonging to Katie in Gabriel Avila truck, detectives investigating Katie's case visited his in prison. Gabriel Avila confessed to the crime, explaining that while his wife was away, he was in the area to buy illicit substances. He claimed that he approached Katie and offered her a ride, which she declined. Later that night, Gabriel Avila encountered Katie again in front of her house. He stopped and offered her assistance, and that Katie told him she was locked out without her purse. Gabriel Avila attempted to help her, but he then attacked and began undressing Katie. What followed was a violent assault. After the assault, Gabriel Avila panicked and decided to strangle Katie out of fear that she would identify him. Despite Katie putting up a brief struggle, Gabriel Avila restrained her, unable to let go, ultimately leading to her death. Gabriel Avila claimed he put Katie in his pickup truck and drove her to a desert landfill, where he left her body on the ground. He attempted to burn the body, thinking it would eliminate evidence. But this effort was unsuccessful. A new DNA sample from Gabriel Avila matched the DNA found at the scene. When authorities found DNA on Katie's body in 2003, her parents were optimistic that it would help quickly find a suspect. However, at the time, there was a significant gap in the law. In New Mexico,